had a bunch of people who had assembled from all kinds of different backgrounds, which is another fascinating thing about cannabis. I shouldn't say that, not nobody. There are some people who come and grew up with cannabis. There are a lot of us who have come into the industry from outside, right? Mm-hmm. And the eclectic nature of that group working together, committed to building something bigger than themselves.
Shedding light on the canopy. As former Chief of Staff at Canadian cannabis giant Canopy Growth, Marnie McKinstry excelled in process and project management at a time of insane expansion. Now, a few months after striking out on her own, she gives us an insight into what the big market players are doing right and wrong, and what smaller fledgling companies can learn from them. Okay, so Marnie McKinstry, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're at. It looks like you're kind of outside somewhere nice right now. So welcome.
Thanks, Dave. Hi. Yeah, I'm close to outside. I'm on a sort of a screened-in type porch on my second floor. Yeah, it's nice. A sunny day in Ottawa today.
Ottawa. So you're based in Canada, and you used to work for Canopy Growth until quite recently. So it would be good to find out a little bit about your time there and how you got into the cannabis sector as well, because you didn't. Well, I guess you had a life before cannabis, I imagine.
I did. Yeah, so I am located in Ottawa, which is about an hour from Smiths Falls, Ontario, and Smiths Falls is the headquarters location of Canopy Growth. So I came to cannabis in a bit of a long path, I guess. I started out actually in the federal government. So most of my career was spent working for the Canadian federal government, mostly with Canada Border Services, some with Health Canada. I have a degree in English, so which qualifies you for, very little.
Or everything, as the case may be.
Or everything, that's right. Yes, that's good, depending on your perspective. So anyways, I sort of found myself after the first couple of years in the government in large-scale projects. So I kind of learned how to walk the talk of IT systems and just found that I liked projects. I realize now it's because I like building things. I'm definitely a builder. That's a realization I've had since working in cannabis, which requires a lot of building. So yeah, I worked in government for 15 years, leading IT-enabled business transformation projects. Several were cross-functional, cross-departmental, and complex. And I enjoyed projects because it takes something from concept, right through to delivery, and I can sort of very much tangibly see the results of my efforts. But after several years, 15 years actually in the government, I grew a little weary of the public service. Yeah. And wanted to do something I think a little more exciting, and we could talk more about that type of change as well if you like, but weed was certainly exciting at the time. So this was about 8 months pre-legalization.
Okay.
I did a bunch of career coaching to sort of reorient myself from public sector, kind of where I fit and where I thought I might fit in the private sector. I had a connection to the former CEO of Canopy, Mark Zakulin, and I pitched myself to him, and things kind of went from there.
Excellent.
They hired me as the first project manager bringing product to market, basically, as well as leading a couple of major initiatives. At the time, they were rebranding the medical website. At the time, they were also beginning to launch retail, and they were building a chocolate factory. There was a lot happening at Canopy Growth when I first arrived.
Absolutely. When you say chocolate factory, because it used to be the Hershey's factory, didn't it? I remember reading somewhere, Smiths Falls.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not going to give you the exact year that closed, but it was a number of years ago, like well over a decade or two.
Yeah. But I think so I remember reading somewhere that basically Canopy Growth kind of helped revitalize the economy for the town there. Is that right? And it was a huge thing at the time, wasn't it, when the factory opened?
It was a huge thing. I mean, it was a big footprint, right? There was a lot of course, investment attached. Well, when it first opened, I mean, to be honest, it was a little quiet when it would have first opened, right? It was early days, or not early days, but 2012, I'm going to say, I think.
Okay.
Was when Bruce Linton and Chuck Rafici first sort of started it up, and then brought Mark Zakulin in, I think, shortly thereafter, but really started as the medical program, right, under the medical regulations. But of course, that was not where the ambition stopped. So,
yeah. But was that a nice, I was going to say, was there a nice segue for you, having worked with sort of Health Canada, into the medicinal market, or was it completely different to what your expectation was going to be in that respect?
My experience at Health Canada actually had nothing to do really with cannabis. So I knew a little bit. I was exposed to things like, which actually comes in handy now, I was exposed to things like regulatory, the regulatory regime of for food, for natural health products, so that has come in handy, right? In working with cannabis, understanding the regulatory pathways and the policies. So that certainly helped, and border services was also a little bit helpful in the sense of understanding, risk and how we evaluate risk and why we might take certain decisions. So all of my experience, I think, collectively has added up to help me. But yeah, so cannabis was definitely a big thing in Smiths Falls, and still is, right? It does. Canopy still employs a number of people in the town. It resulted in, a huge influx of employment, a huge influx of local businesses, right? In order to serve Canopy and its employees, there's been restaurants that have opened, and B&Bs and hotels or motels, right? Like locally, it's really added a lot to the economy that, in
different ways. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Don't have to have a cannabis leaf to sort of, show their allegiance. It just naturally sort of happens that way, I guess. But it must have been a really interesting time for growth. I mean, how was it for you? What was your kind of career trajectory within Canopy?
So when I first arrived, I think I was employee number 3,000 or something like that.
Okay, so how many employees are there now, roughly, would you say?
Right now, I'm going to say they're probably around 7,000. Okay. But that's a ballpark.
Yeah. No, I'm just curious there, but yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So kind of the early-ish doors.
Early-ish, yes. And again, pre-legalization. So I joined at the end of March 2018, and the things were hot, right? Like the company was running really fast in a lot of directions, and domestically to prepare for legalization, but as well globally, right? There was expenditure and capital, building happening in South America, in Australia, in Europe. There had already been assets purchased, right? Like it was all sort of happening at once. And so when I first joined before legalization, the company really did have a lot of balls in the air, and they needed somebody to work across all of these functions, right? To help pull together planning, to help pull together objectives, and then just sort of lead those teams to execute on that plan. So I quickly, when I first got in, it was about 3 weeks into the role, and I was frankly very overwhelmed, and I thought I had made a terrible mistake. So there was some tears shed in week 3, I will tell you, and that was my counsel to future employees. When you get to week 3, you're going to think you've made a terrible mistake. Persist; it'll be okay.
Yeah, but it was very much that baptism of fire in terms. I mean, was it just immersion in not just having 1,000,001 things to do, but I mean, just in terms of understanding the sector itself? I mean, did you have, any sort of background or knowledge of the sector at all?
Not really. I mean, I was a pot smoker when I joined, so it's not like I was totally new to the product. But that was kind of about it. I didn't really know much about the industry. An industry. I knew about how to get weed from the guy, but I didn't know about how to get weed out of a big company. And quite honestly, that's what made it exciting, right? Yeah. So you had a bunch of people who had assembled from all kinds of different backgrounds, which is another fascinating thing about cannabis. I shouldn't say that, not nobody. There are some people who come and grew up with cannabis. There are a lot of us who have come into the industry from outside, right? And the eclectic nature of that group, working together, committed to building something bigger than themselves, right? I think that was really the nature of the spirit and the culture at the time at Canopy when I joined. And, well into legalization after the first year or two was really this like we're doing really cool stuff. And guess what? It actually helps people. And guess what? It can also be fun, right? Yeah. And so...
No, I mean, that for me is very much that spirit seems to persist today. And, I've been to sort of, meetings or kind of, events, and, you do have that eclectic and, unified spirit of, progress, and actually let's build this the right way and do what we want to do.
And I think that really became, and it has become, the trick, right? Mm-hmm. As a project manager by background, I kind of view a lot of the industry as actually a project still. Mm-hmm. Right. We're still, and you can aggregate it, right? It's a company here, and then they've got a brand and a product, or they've got a facility, right? And then there's another company, and then there's a country that's trying to legalize cannabis. Those are all projects, right? With defined outcomes. Canada is now moving into a maintenance mode, right? Mm-hmm. on the industry, but there's so much growing still happening. And so I kind of look at it as this constant series of projects. And I think when you look at it that way, a project manager is trained really to look for what their outcome is, what is the end value we're delivering, what is the benefit to the consumer, and really quantifying that and constantly keeping that goal in mind. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, I'm getting into project management here and how it converges with cannabis. I don't know how I got here, but here I am. So I just think, there's an opportunity to look at the industry and how it is growing with that lens. Mm-hmm. And I think some companies might be better served to look at it with that lens, right? As opposed to, we're just going to start growing weed and packaging it and go for it, right? There's very much a go for it attitude. Yeah, I think absolutely. Knowing what you're going for and making sure that you're equipped to do it is equally as important as going for it.
But I mean, do you feel like having, obviously, you talk about, having very clear goals and being able to get to that point, do you feel like a lot of the time, just because of the way the industry is, that, those goals have to constantly change? Or do you think it's the way you get to those goals that has to change, or both?
It's both, really. Yeah. I do think the goals, but that's what's cool about it, right? The goals have to constantly evolve because there's new science coming in, right? There's new user adoption, criteria coming in. There's new formats coming in. It's all changing all the time. I think the trick is, understanding your environment very clearly, understanding, again, what that goal is, what you think your company or you as an individual have to deliver, right, in this space that is valuable and that can be defined, right? And then allowing yourself to be ready to shift. But in order to be able to shift, you need a solid foundation, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's kind of where we're getting to in Canada. We need a lot of companies to kind of shore up their foundation. We need the industry to shore up its foundation so that all of us can start pivoting and innovating. Mm-hmm. Because you can't pivot on, without a firm footing.
And what do you feel like that firm footing should look like, or already looks like? What point do you think we need to be at, or particularly in Canada?
So if I'm looking at the Canadian market as a whole, I think firm footing is needed in a few areas. Obviously, fiscal responsibility. I think that fundamentally has what's been missing for a number of years. And again, that goes back to knowing what your outcome and your objective is and having a business case that gets you there, right? Mm-hmm. You don't need to boil the ocean with that business case and spend $1 billion and a lot of months on it. But winging it is not going to serve anybody well. So I think there's certainly some fiduciary responsibilities that need to be shored up in the industry. Mm-hmm. I think that along with that, you should probably see companies and the industry start to narrow in on the true areas of value for the consumer, right? So we in Canada now have had an explosion of brands and products and there's new things coming out all the time. What we have is this vast landscape of products and brands. Mm-hmm. Some are going to die, right? Just by nature of, attrition of a brand and a product. Some are merging, right? But we need that foundation of brands to kind of shake out, I think. And I think we're sort of getting there. But again, like 250 SKUs on any given day in a store is a lot for a new consumer, right? So I think that innovation, our innovation potential has to be founded on fundamentals. And I think a lot of the companies are still firming up those fundamentals, whether it's in grow and grow capacity and, managing inventory, whether it's in the fundamentals on the R&D and the science and tech, right? Getting your margins down on some of those manufacturing opportunities. I think you're also seeing a lot of the industry is generating new businesses, right? So we've got a lot of co-manufacturers coming up, right? Who are either, some of them are developing in-house brands, some of them are co-manufacturing, some of them have partnerships, right, with external brands. So none of that is, I would say, innovative in a product sense necessarily, right? But it's the industry shaking out and developing its own foundation, I think, which needs to happen.
I was reading, I think something a little bit earlier, but someone's talking about innovation is not just bringing out, a new product to do something or a new piece of kit or something like that, particularly in the cannabis sector. It's about, it really is understanding that, what the consumer wants. And unless it's found rooted in that, then it's just not going to work. And that sounds to be something that you're sort of echoing that sentiment in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree. It's not going to work. And I think, so a couple of things, I think we are still figuring out what the consumer wants today. And we have obviously different segments, like with any category of goods, right? We have different segments of consumers using cannabis in different ways. I think that innovation is about often anticipating somebody's needs before they even identify them, right? So being something innovative, and it doesn't mean it has to be wacky, right? It doesn't mean it has to be something that's way out there, but it does mean trying to think ahead of where the consumers not just is today, but where they are going to want to go with a product and with a category.
And what do you think, what in your opinion is the sort of next sort of trend, or what trends are you sort of seeing now that you think, that could be a thing in a year or two's time? Is there anything, whether it's a category or a product or... Yeah,
it's really interesting. So I think a couple of things on the product side. Again, there's new things coming out all the time. I think some of them are potentially fads, but again, innovation sometimes can be something that comes off as faddy but ends up sticking. Fatty. I don't know if that's right.
Yeah. We'll go with that. That's fine.
But yeah, I think there are some new things. I just saw this morning a spray. Sprays are not new necessarily, but there are a couple of new ones that claim to titrate accurately, taste good. So I think there's some interesting delivery formats that are going to help us bring new users into the category, new consumers into the category, right? That are not vaping, that are not smoking. Of course, edibles and beverages, right? I think are the big part of the future of the industry. The challenge there is helping people to see them as normalized products as well, and helping people understand where and when to consume. So my position, I'm looking at product, but I'm also really interested in environment and education and edutainment, as one might say, right? It doesn't have to be hard education going to taking even an online class for 6 weeks or something like that. It can be, how am I educated in a setting and in an environment that I'm comfortable with, that I'm familiar with, and where I feel, I can learn and not be judged.
And do you think brands have an opportunity, or do they have a responsibility to do that, do you feel? Whether it be a dispensary, whether it be a kind of, licensed producer, do you think that's a conversation that has to come from them as much as it might do from, I don't know, an official body or whatever?
It does. The issue and the challenge, particularly in Canada, are very strict regulations, right? So this is a very different conversation in California. This is a different conversation. In Canada, the issue is on the brand and the producer side, you can't, really advertise as to effects. You can't really advertise. You can't put that person, this was something the industry, lobbied against or for, and still does. Like a beer company might have a person with a cooler on a dock, and there is no such thing. You cannot have people in the ads. You cannot depict people enjoying themselves. Really, it's very restrictive. In the dispensary environment, the retail environment, you can create an experience, but because you're selling product, you can't also Same thing. You can't communicate as to what you think that product might do for that consumer. You can say some people use it for X, Y, and Z, but there's no dialogue in a retail environment where a consumer cannot come in and ask for a recommendation on a particular product for a particular need necessarily, where they can directly give you a product recommendation. They are not supposed to be selling you.
As in, bud tenders can't do that. They can't. Someone can't come in. Well, they might be able to, but again, officially, they can't do that. That's
right. Like, and I think, there's wiggle words around this. I need something to relax. I need something, right? Like, some people find this relaxing, right? They can use those sorts of terminology, but there's very little you can do to directly address a consumer's desires.
And do you feel like bud tenders in particular, or dispensary owners, they understand that innately? Is that something that, regulations are already hard on? You must do it like this or we will shut you down. Is it that simple?
Yeah, the regulations in Canada are very tough in terms of marketing and promotion. And I mean, that's how Health Canada wanted it. Health Canada doesn't actually really want a legal market. I don't think I should say a recreational market in Canada, right? They're allowing it. I look at more of Health Canada is allowing a recreational market. They're doing it reluctantly, right? Okay. Their objective has been to regulate a medical regime and a medical market and create a harm-reduced regulated playing field for the recreational market, right? So we'll let you have a rec market or an adult use market, but we're going to make it really difficult for you to advertise because they're concerned about the impact on children. They're concerned about the proliferation of legal weed, recreational weed, right? That's not actually.
And I think that's, again, a lot of people I've heard say this about, you go into a dispensary, you just see, was it black packets with the kind of THC sticker on it? It's not like anywhere else in the US, in different states, where you can kind of openly have a brand and sort of position it as a sort of lifestyle thing. And again, it's kind of like, that's what we have to put up with. And so how do you kind of navigate that? I mean, again, that's a consumer question, I guess. And I'm not sure you're able to answer, but I mean, how do people sort of, the information, like what strain is good? What does this do? Where are those conversations kind of taking place? I mean, you say person to person, or?
Yeah, a bud tender can talk to you about a strain characteristics, right? If they can talk to you about the terpenes, and the good ones are starting to learn more about just, it's an indica sativa hybrid and
the cannabinoids and, all of the, what's in it.
They're starting to learn more about the attributes. So that certainly is happening. And then I think consumers are there are certain sites out there, Leafly, you can get some information. But again, I think a lot of it is trial and error, which is kind of the way cannabis should be for a lot of people, because it doesn't work the same way for all people at all times of day, right? It's a plant. So
absolutely. And I guess the entourage effect, people talk about isolating terpenes. I mean, we recently went to a kind of medical cannabis event here in the UK, and that was very much driven home that, it's, even though you can isolate certain terpenes and things like that, it's better to have it in, as the plant itself. But again, like you say, the plant has different effects on different people, and it's not like a prescription medication in the conventional sense. It's not like Big Pharma where you got this problem, take this pill, take this medication. And that's a hard perception to change, I think, from a medical perspective. Well, that's at least my impression.
Well, and we might get there, right? Like Big Pharma is continuing to research. So we might get to the point in, I don't know how long that would be to prove out some of those things, 5-10 years, where Big Pharma is saying, we have clinical evidence that this THC in this concentration, right, for this purpose will work for everybody to do this, right? We might get there, and maybe we're closer to that than I even think. But I think this bridge I think we're still building a bridge to understand this plant as it helps medical patients versus as it helps just the regular layperson, right? I think there's an aspect of self-medicating, right, that happens in a large part of the recreational, quote unquote, recreational user base, and has for many years, right? I think there are people who are using cannabis to manage anxiety, manage their mood, perhaps manage, some gut and intestinal issues. There's all kinds of reasons, right?
Oh, absolutely.
They might not have gone to a doctor for it. They've been doing it for years. In a country where there's a medical, regime and there are participating insurance companies, then, it's a great way to take yourself. It's a great reason to take your self-medicated regime into a real practitioner, right? And speak with a doctor. But where there's a little less incentive to do that, where there's not insurance coverage for it, I mean, people might just continue to use the recreational avenue. So I guess all this to say, I do feel there's room here. There's a spectrum of use, right? And I'm noticing a gap a little bit, I would say, and I think I have for a while, between medical, which comes off as clinical and, will eventually track to pharma. But again, that's on that far end of the spectrum. And then the other end of the spectrum, which is recreational. I think there's, wellness is in there.
Absolutely. And again, it kind of defines, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say it's an interesting one, because again, I think that's reflected in the sorts of brands or companies that you see coming out, from all different, from the US and from Canada. It's really interesting. You do have that kind of broad sweep, and you do have that different kind of aesthetic, for the way brands are sort of, bringing themselves into being, and the sort of way how they advertise themselves. And again, it really does vary. And I think, again, you've got this kind of varied way of branding. You've got this varied kind of different types of products that you can use for different purposes. And again, there's nothing else quite like that out there. If it's, you work in the construction industry, it's the construction industry. You work in finance, it's finance. And it will sort of verge on different things, like tech will come in, and you'll see elements of that to improve efficiencies. And it becomes a bit more, introducing new ideas. But when you've got such a sort of wide, it's not even like the alcohol market. It's not like it. You don't have alcohol for medicinal. People will joke and say, I'm having a couple of medicinals or whatever, in inverted commas, but that's about as scientific as it gets, right?
Well, no doctor is going to prescribe you, two whiskey a night. Well, not
well,
but no, that's exactly it. I mean, I think back to the education point. I think there's a lot being done. Companies are looking for ways to educate consumers. They really are. It's not like they're ignoring the issue. I think they are looking for innovative ways. I think there's a couple of good publications that have been getting a lot of traction. The Canigma is another good one. It's out of Israel. And so there are definitely some, groups, organizations that are starting to build these communications in an approachable way and in a way that people can understand, because to your point, it's really complex. And I think that what happens to a lot of new entrants is they underestimate the complexity, right? Because you assume people have been smoking weed for, however many years, right?
Yeah.
But we understand more about it. We're doing different things with it. And it was always inherently complex. We just didn't really have the tools to understand that. So to your point about beverage and alcohol, there are a lot of people in the industry that come from beverage alcohol. And I think they come into the industry, there's definitely parallels, highly regulated market, definitely that recreational focus, right? It's a bit of the mod squad, right? The merchants of death, right? Like alcohol, tobacco, weapons.
Right.
So there's some alignment there, surely, certainly from a cannabis perspective, but they quickly, I think, come into the industry and realize this, wine can be complex, and I guess beer can be complex too, but this is not that, right? We've not been growing cannabis on a mass scale for very long at all. We've not, been making THC vaporization products for very long at all, or edibles. And so I think people underestimate the complexity. I think they overestimate what they can achieve within a certain period of time. And that then leads to, resource burn and all kinds of things. So I think the education really is like, maybe it's like cannabis, there's more to it than you think, or something. I don't know.
That's it. It's not just as simple. It's not as simple as But again, it's interesting that the more people I speak to, the more, again, you come to that realization. And, it's even once you've gotten past all the kind of, you try and get a global perspective, different regulations, different countries, different levels of decriminalization. You have that in Europe, you have that in the US between different states and things like that. And I guess, do you feel like in Canada, because you've got, is it essentially the same market throughout, all the provinces and territories, essentially? Is it treated in the same way, different to how, in the US, you can do this in California, you can do this in Oregon, you can do this in Colorado and Nebraska, forget about it. similar or completely different in that respect?
Yes. Have we taken the inherently complex product and manufacturing and made it more complex with government regulation? Yes, we have. So in Canada, yeah, there are several provinces. I'm not going to try and name them because I'll probably get them wrong. I think I'll try. I think it's Manitoba, Alberta. That might be it. I might be missing one that sell direct to consumer, for instance, right? So they also allow private retailers in Ontario, in Alberta, whereas in Quebec it is all through government-run retail. Same thing in New Brunswick. I think Nova Scotia might be the same way. So yeah, I'm a bit out of the game in terms of who's got
it's a movable feast, isn't it? Everything seems to change.
It's a patchwork, which drives complexity back into the companies too, right? They have different shipping and handling practices and policies, different back-end systems implications for controlling inventory, for shipping, right, for managing retail, right? It's a very complicated business, which makes it fun and interesting, but complicated. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of sort of companies that you're seeing sort of do it right in Canada, I mean, are there any ones that sort of like, you're really ahead of the game in terms of your understanding of the consumer, in terms of how you're manufacturing, do you see that? Is there any kind of real sort of yardstick that you'd say, these organizations or this company is doing? You don't have to name names, but I'm just curious. Do you think any one party has got it right in that respect? Or is it just like, well, everyone's just finding their way like everyone else, we're all faking it till we make it type thing?
I think so. I don't know if I'll get into names, but what I will say is I think what you're starting to see is the maturity of the industry, right? A natural kind of tiering of companies. So, in the flower, I mostly shop flower. So in the flower category and the pre-roll category, there are companies now who are getting, I think the companies who are being able to produce quality at scale are obviously the ones who are going to start to thrive. A number of companies, of course, have produced a lot of bud at poor quality, bringing down kind of the market for the rest of them. But I think this tiering is really starting to be apparent now. What's emerging is a lot of craft brands, and craft brands are interesting because you get enough of these craft brands with some distributors, which the distribution industry is also kind of kicking up in Canada, right? So enough of these craft brands with the right distribution teams, and they could take a large chunk of the market to be. I'm not sure what their slice is at the moment, their market share, but so definitely in flower, I like what's happening with craft. I think beverages and edibles are going to continue to be interesting. The formulation, even if I just focus on beverages, the formulation around beverages, again, is not as easy as everyone thinks, and nor is nailing an ideal, from the innovator or a company, a product, sort of product innovation perspective, nailing an ideal product is a challenge, right? Getting the product with the right flavor, the right color, the right turbidity, right? How cloudy or not it is. I learned so much. Believe me, I didn't know this much about beverages before I joined the company.
I've never heard the word turbidity before. I'm not going to be honest.
So beverage manufacturing itself is interesting and complicated. So all this to say, like, there is still so much room for companies to niche in on good quality product with good manufacturing processes, with well-designed brands in those advanced manufactured formats, right? Because there's a proliferation of brands and products that are, people try them and that's, there are a lot of, I don't want to say fly by night, but I think there are a lot of companies that are trying to make a buck and a lot of genuine entrepreneurs who want to try, but
sort of dip a toe into the cannabis sector. I mean, I guess, making an infused beverage isn't like, we'll just take a soda and stick a few drops of, THC oil in, and it's not,
that's a whole other conversation, right? Like,
but then that's a quality issue as well, isn't it? It's like, okay, well, yeah, it potentially could, but then it's going to taste probably absolutely disgusting is one thing. But then there's kind of like, like you come back to that quality, the companies that are making consistently good quality products and, have all of those, have the distribution aligned, have everything working in the right way. It's, it presents opportunity, but again, it's about understanding the customer focus and, that customer experience is Do you think that's something easy to overlook by companies who are just like, we're dealing with producing, we're dealing with, regulations, and, the customer gets what they get, they'll be happy because it's weed, right? In whatever form it is. And do you think that was something, and it's not,
I think it
people
was.
are changing?
I think it was. I think it still is. I think there's certainly some, entrepreneurs new in the space who think, well, everybody's selling weed. Why shouldn't I? Right? Like that's certainly an attitude, an approach. Then on the other hand, you've got data, right, being collected. This is new too, right? It's, again, the industry didn't exist up until recently, right? So there was no data to go on. So that's something that's really growing in Canada, is the industry of like collecting data at retail, collecting all the sell-through data, right? Figuring out what's performing where, aggregating that, and then using that to make some decisions. So that will help the industry mature, I think. But I think my observation is that I think we missed the mark a little bit in Canada. I think what we did was take, and I don't mean any one company, I mean everyone. I think what we did was take a product that people have been growing for a lot of years and using themselves, as we talked about, right? Using on their own. We assumed we could put it into containers with labels, and then everybody would know how to do it, what to do with it. And then new consumers, I think we assumed old consumers would pick it up right away, right? Legacy market consumers would see we thought they would see the benefit of.
They're kind of given. It's kind of everyone else. Oh, it's legal now. We can just pick it up and we can all do this now. Yay, and type thing. But not
right.
Kids. Yeah.
Right. So that's not necessarily converted people the way we thought into the legal market. And I think it's about, cannabis is much more than just a product, right? It, again, different people, different ways, different settings. I use it differently in the morning than I might at night, right? And that's not, we need to be able to educate people. And ideally, we haven't even talked about on-premise, but that's where this would happen, right? Ideally, this happens in an on-premise environment where you can educate people on the process of consuming, what they might be feeling, why they're feeling, how they might want to use it differently next time, right? But I think when we just put it into a bunch of product and brand, we missed the opportunity to have that conversation. Again, the regulations don't allow for it, so it is really tough. But that's what I guess maybe that's where I'm at now, is I'm looking to figure out how to crack that nut of how to go to the market with people, right?
Absolutely. So what is next for you right now? Because so you kind of struck, as we were saying, struck it on your own. So where are you at now? What's your kind of next move in the sector? What are you?
Yeah, so I'm sort of, I've got my feet on a couple of gas pedals, so I'm sort of managing them as I go. I am definitely embarking on this new path of, being an independent. I've always had a job, so this is another transition for me. And what I'm doing now is sort of looking for companies, I'm looking for partners who want to build product, who want to build, I'm looking at events. I'm very interested in events, services. So again, back to that idea that we need education. We want to entertain people. We want to meet them in a space where they're comfortable to talk to them about cannabis versus in a dispensary maybe, right? Yep. So I'm looking at opportunities specifically in that space, but as well working with anybody who's building new product lines, right? So I think that was my bread and butter at Canopy, and I'm happy to work with anybody who's looking to build a beverage or an edible, or companies who are looking to scale as well, scale into new markets. I'm very interested in the European market and what might happen in the UK and Europe. So I'm watching that. In some ways, cannabis has, well, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of opportunity. So again, it's about being able to watch for the opportunity, not get necessarily too locked into anything, and being able to pivot. But that's sort of where I'm scanning the environment right now and speaking with people.
Absolutely. And we met in Barcelona at ICBC. Are you heading over for the Berlin event, or are you looking at other ones sort of in the US or Canada, or?
I'm thinking of the Berlin event. I think I'm likely going to be at the Kind Summer Fair in Toronto. So that's, I think, the first week of July. The other thing I'm noticing, I didn't do a lot of these trade conferences or shows or, industry conferences when I was with Canopy. I was very internal. There are a lot of them, and they're happening all over the world.
Yes.
And I'm an independent, so I'm sure you understand. I don't have a budget just yet. So
it's figuring it all out, and there's picking and choosing, isn't it? Absolutely, no.
That's right.
I totally feel that it's an interesting one. It's like, well, you could go everywhere, and or not. But no, I guess it kind of depends on. I mean, what's good is that you see so many of these events. The fact that they're happening is really interesting, and I think. The European market, I'm not sure if you saw the Recreational Europe report by Hanway, and just talking about just how different that is, how it's changing, and just getting a sense of what's happening on the ground. I mean, again, Europe, I guess like America, like in the US, you can't treat it as one market. It's a variety of different markets, trying to navigate varying degrees of legalization and trials and, So it's an interesting, I mean, particularly here in the UK, again, medical cannabis is legal, but not a lot of people know about it. And, again, there's the whole challenge that, medical professionals are those kind of gatekeepers, and it's educating them about the product, about what cannabis is capable of doing, and kind of helping them overcome their own kind of preconceptions that have been, it's just a fascinating time. And again, there's a huge job to do, but it's quite an exciting one as well, I think. And I guess that is happening in varying degrees in different countries around the world, but very much still it's the education, that stigma to overcome, that this is, and again, I always think it's interesting because there's always been this whole don't smoke, never smoke type thing. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, vaping's okay. And vaping cannabis is the best. It's kind of everything we've been told not to do now is okay again. And it's like, that takes a while to kind of navigate and get people back on track with, oh, we can do this now. That's all right. That's how I see it anyway. It's intriguing.
Well, we should do another chat about vaporizing. I've got
okay.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's the medical conversation is a long one. Mm-hmm. It takes a long time. We still have doctors in Canada, despite it being a medically available product for 20 plus years, I guess, 20-ish years. There are still doctors who don't understand it, who are not really for it, right? There's just not enough evidence yet. And so that is going to take time. So I think if you're a company who's planning on entering a market, keep that in mind. I think that was the lesson that the whole industry learned. A lot of Canadian companies, right, went out and started investing globally and have had to sell those facilities or halt those plans because the regs just take a long time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the more I read about, things happening in, everywhere, US, Canada, the sort of bigger companies coming in and sort of buying up smaller companies, doesn't quite work out. Or again, I don't want to get into naming names, but there's some interesting activity happening. And you think, really, why would they do that? Oh, okay. They're kind of anticipating that this is going to be a thing in a couple of years' time. And, again, who knows, if they got the kind of luxury of, being able to say, well, we'll put some money there just in case, then, that's fortuitous for them, I guess, in that respect. They can do that, but everybody else is a little more, I don't know. I don't know. It's like, I think, I've heard so many people say it's the Wild West, isn't it? That's the thing of it. It's the
Wild West, but again, like, I can't even tell you the number of people I talk to that don't seem to have a plan, that don't seem to know where they're going. So if you ask me, it's the Wild West, but there's a lot of room for operators who are strategic, who are thoughtful, who are efficient, and who are circumspect, right? And who are you can't predict the future, but you can prepare yourself to be responsive. And that's what smart companies do. Unfortunately, the industry gets a bad rep because of all the other ones who rush in headlong without much thought, right? So that's just my 2 cents. I think there's a lot of room for people who want to think carefully and do good business, for sure.
Yeah, but that's it. It's a case of just seeing what happens and following, I guess, the sensible activity. And I don't know what that is. That seems to vary from. But again, coming back to that whole idea of when you talk about project management and having clear goals and thinking, okay, what can we do that's going to have an impact regardless of what happens, seems to be the way forward. And I think it's. Again, it's an interesting one, but it's an interesting challenge, and I'm sure it's one that you could help a lot of people with. It sounds like so, but that's great. So
kind of fun.
Yeah, absolutely, good stuff. Well, thank you, Marnie. Thank you very much for your time, and we will catch up again, and we'll have that vaporization conversation at some point. That would be cool. But thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Dave.
Take care. Cheers. All the best.
Bye bye.